Our only goal tonight, and for as long as this takes, is to get those people that are currently caught in that building out of there safely. That remains our number one priority, and nothing will change.
Since that press conference, all of the hostages are now freed in downtown Sydney, and the killer is under arrest. Now, the downtown area of a major international city did indeed come to a standstill. Another mind determined to kill if demands are not met grows in our midst. And another reason to understand how the core of this threat must be dealt with swiftly and without mercy. Our guest is the retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel who served his country proudly for 35 years, earning 5 Bronze Stars. Currently, special faculty in the Department of History at North Carolina State University, where he teaches military history. It's a pleasure to welcome back Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Bolger. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Ed. Good to be here, although obviously difficult subject we're talking about, but one that's very important.
It is difficult, but let's put this into some perspective here. Here we have a suspect who was once charged with murder. He is an Iranian refugee. He demands an ISIS-styled flag. This has all the earmarks of being something connected to ISIS. Granted, we're not sure yet. This could be just another one of these lone wolves, or what we like to call the whack jobs out there. But let's just say this. What more can we and free nations do to cut these potential killers off and find them before they strike and potentially take lives?
Well, that's the issue right there. You got to move on several tracks. It's in our home countries, places like Australia, the United States, Canada, Great Britain. The police have got to be active in hunting out these type of people when they make themselves known. This guy Monis had already been charged with murder. You know, he came as a refugee from Iran, but obviously brought with him some ideas that weren't in accord with Australian society, to say the least. And, you know, a guy like this has to be carefully watched by the police. And I'm sure they were looking after him, but in retrospect, they didn't watch him closely enough.
But doesn't this tell us that there needs to be something deeper when it comes down to the investigative nature here, bringing in the police and the military here? Because you and I both know that when you start to get to that point, you're going to hear about civil rights violations. And indeed, there are certain lines that can't be crossed. But how do we do it then and find these people? Because at times, some rules, unfortunately, and I know this is going to be tough for people to absorb, have to be broken to find the bad guys.
Well, exactly. We're going through this exact same debate in our own country in the aftermath of this Senate report about did the Central Intelligence Agency torture al-Qaeda suspects and all that kind of stuff. You know, our enemy uses against us the fact that we give people rights warnings and lawyers and that we follow a rule of law. They know that. They don't follow any rules. And so as a result, we got to think really, really carefully about who gets the benefit of those privileges of citizenship in a place like the United States. Hey, as far as I know, this guy was not an Australian citizen. He was not subject to Queen Elizabeth, who's the head of state in Australia as a member of the Commonwealth. This guy was a refugee who was admitted as a kindness by the Australian people and then repaid him by killing him.
Are we going to reach a point in our societal development, and Australia and other places as well, where we simply can no longer afford those sorts of kindnesses that you talk about, letting people into the country and basically saying, come and be part of this civilization? And again, I know there's people who are going to just chafe at what I'm saying here, but that we've got to be more careful because these people are out there. They want to kill us at every single turn.
Listen, Ed, we got to look at that sort of thing. In the wake of 9/11, one of the things we looked at was how the people who got on those airliners got in our country. In several cases from Saudi Arabia, we had actually expedited their visas into our country so they could take the training they needed to seize those airliners and kill Americans on 9/11. And so, yeah, we got to take a serious look at this. There's people from certain parts of the world that need extra scrutiny. And if they're clean, they got nothing to worry about. But if they're criminal types, if they're terrorist types, they need to be worried.
Is that the biggest challenge that we face right now, is trying to make it fair, yet at the same time keeping us secure? And I'll be very honest with you, when you look at it, there doesn't seem to be a midpoint there, not trying to be ironic here, that we can find to make this all happen.
Yeah, it's really tough because we want to protect our own rights of our citizens, which of course are inherent to citizenry in the United States. And then at the same time, you got to go after the bad guys. It also implies that we have to be credible when we go after them in their own countries. And in my mind, what we just did in Iraq and what we're wrapping up in Afghanistan, you know, we didn't stick with it in both of those two countries. In both cases, we backed out before the job was done. We've had to already go back into Iraq. And you know, the enemy gets a message from that we don't have staying power, and then they follow us home.
All right, hold that thought, because we're going to come back on the other side. We'll talk a little bit more about credibility. Also, Secretary of State John Kerry dealing with the Russians and our allies, the Israelis, at the same time. That and so much more coming up right here on MidPoint. Let's welcome back former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, current military history teacher at NC State University, and author of such books as Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Bolger. Lieutenant Colonel, here we have the Russians and the Americans talking again. John Kerry is in Russia, or in Rome, I should say, talking to their foreign minister. And basically, the foreign minister there, Sergei Lavrov, says it's useless for Washington to try to pressure Moscow in the world arena. Plus, at the same time, the Pentagon is considering the deployment, the redeployment, if you will, of nuclear missiles in Europe. Are we heading towards MAD all over again?
Well, I think it's important to remember, Ed, we're already there. I mean, today the Russians have thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at us, and we have several thousand pointed at them. I mean, we don't like to talk about it, but that's the country that our stuff is aimed at, that and the Chinese, and the Russians have them aimed at us. Tonight, even as we speak right now, if a Russian guy wanted to do it, and I don't think they do, but if they wanted to do it, they could fire all that stuff off at us. So, I mean, we're already there.
Then why do we keep kidding ourselves that the Russians may be a salvageable relationship, and maybe, oh, just maybe, Vladimir Putin is just a preening demigod, if you will, who wants everybody to see him shirtless, and we don't have to worry too much about him? Why do we keep kidding ourselves like this?
You know, that is the question of the day. I mean, Vladimir Putin's a former member of the KGB, the Russian secret police. He rose to lieutenant colonel in that odious organization. He's effectively the dictator of Russia. He's run the country for 14 years. He's manipulated their constitution. He's denied rights. He's invaded Crimea and taken it over, which is a region in the Black Sea, a large region. I mean, the guy's a dictator. Look at the ceremonies around the Olympics in 2014 in Sochi and compare them with 1936 with Hitler in Germany. They look pretty similar.
Would we then be smart to basically look him in the eye and say, that's it, hard line, don't cross it, we're done, stop the pussyfooting around here with John Kerry and others, and basically go nose to nose with this guy? Or is that just fraught with an inherent amount of danger? Listen,
it's too dangerous not to be clear with these guys. We have got to let Putin and the Russians know that they have gone far enough, and that any further, I mean, as you know, they're butt up against NATO allies like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. They go into any of those countries, that's an attack on NATO. And according to Article 5 of the NATO agreement, an attack on one's the attack on all. And then you are talking about a nuclear standoff. So we got to stop these guys now.
Let's turn to Israel very quickly here, because there's even talk that President Obama, may have some sort of sanctions plan to get Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is basically taking over the government until they have a new election next year. Are we part of the problem there? The fact that we are not firmly behind the Israelis in everything they do, and that's weakening them, and in case weakening the entire Middle East?
Listen, Ed, if I could figure out what we got against Israel with this current administration, I don't understand it. They've been a loyal ally. We've been close to them for years. They cooperate. I mean, you talk about guys who know how to deal with terrorists. The Israelis know that, and they've shared that practical knowledge with us. We have worked together for decades working with that country. It is the only legitimate democracy in that region, and why we would turn our back on them is beyond me.
All right, here comes the ISIS question now. Apparently, according to a pamphlet, question and answers on female slaves and their freedom, allegedly from ISIS. Can you take non-Muslim women and children captive? Yes. Can you have sex with them, even prepubescent girls? Yes. Can you sell them or give them as gifts to others? Yes. I say all this because there's always optimism, it seems, Lieutenant Colonel. Don't worry, we're getting control of everything. We're there, we're tamping them down. Would it be fair to say that in light of this and in light of what we're looking at, there's no cause for optimism that we're actually gaining control over ISIS at this time?
Hey, there's absolutely no cause for optimism, Ed. I got to tell you right now, that just shows what dangerous, difficult people these guys are. I mean, they are people who will cut the heads off of innocents. They'll slice their necks. They're as bad as they can be. And the only way to deal with them finally is to kill them.
What about the Taliban now? Because seeing as we're pulling out of Afghanistan, attacks are rising in the Afghan capital now. Aren't we right where you and others who know military history maybe a year ago said we'd be, that quite frankly, we're heading out. Here comes the Taliban. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah, we're right exactly in the same place. There's no doubt about it, Ed. What we've done is by pulling our forces out the way we're doing it, and we got some still there. We got about 10,000 still there, but we've announced a withdrawal. The Taliban will fill that vacuum. They are also head cutters, enslavers. I mean, they're exactly as bad as ISIS, the same kind of enemy. They can only accept force as an answer, and we got to give it to them. And if we don't give them that, they will fill the vacuum.
I only have about 15 seconds left. You believe that 10 years down the road, we're going to look back and call this president the most ineffective and the most dangerous president to put us in the position of weakness that we've seen in current memory?
We definitely need to be stronger, and it does concern me that we're not.
And we certainly are not. All right, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give you a promotion there, but then again, it is that wonderful time of year. It's always good. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Bolger, we want to thank you so much. A reminder again, the book is Why We Lost, a general's inside account of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Thank you so much to you and your family. A very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Ed. Thank you.
Take care. Break, and we're back with the dare tossed up of the president with regard to whomever holds his seat in 2016. That and more coming up right here on MidPoint.